School psychologists really play a pretty broad role in educational systems. They do special education evaluations, and they're really kind of measurement and data experts, which is really cool for somebody like me who loves to kind of be able to measure progress and see how things work. We also do work such as working with students and working with families. We can provide counseling services to kids. We also do a lot of consultation services. So I can work with a teacher. So if you're in your music classroom struggling with how do I engage this student, or how do I stop this kid from tapping his foot all day, that's a great role of a school psychologist in providing consultation around behavior or learning.
Hey friends, Scott Kummrow, Masters of the Musiverse. Did you know that this week is National School Psychology Week? It used to be called School Psychology Awareness Week. And I think that title is actually more appropriate because I think so many of us, myself included, are very unaware of what our friends, the school psychologist, does in the school district. This conversation with Meghan Hickey was very enlightening for me, and I hope you also find it enlightening. And as she said in this interview, maybe after you hear this, you will go out and hug a school psychologist because they are amazing people doing amazing work, and we need to support them. And also, in the end, you'll see that by not only supporting them, we're going to find out how they can help us out in our classrooms. Enjoy this conversation with Dr. Meghan Hickey.
Welcome to Masters of the Musiverse. Please take a moment to subscribe to the YouTube channel and podcast. Like this video and click the bell to be notified of new videos with guests like Dr. Meghan Hickey. Thank you for being here with us today.
Yes, thank you for having me. I'm excited to talk a little bit about school psychology.
Yep, and we'll dive right in. I'm just wondering if you can kind of give us a background of where you work and what your role is with the Minnesota School Psychologists Association.
Sure. So my name is Meghan Hickey. I am a school psychologist of my heart. I currently work as a director of student services in Robbinsdale area schools, and I'm also the president of the Minnesota School Psychologists Association.
I read that you have a bachelor's degree in child psychology, as well as a master's and PhD in educational psychology. Is this the kind of education it takes for someone to be a school psychologist?
Yeah, it does. But there's a couple other ways that people can become school psychologists too. Most people who work as practicing school psychologists have an educational specialist degree. So that's a master's plus, typically either a master's degree plus 1 or 2 more years of education. So that can be done in a little bit of shorter time. There's many practitioners who also have doctorates, and folks who have doctorates oftentimes end up in different kinds of roles, like teaching at universities or training new school psychologists.
Sure. Do people often like not have school psychology in mind when they're on and they're going to do something else, and then there's something that connects them? Or is it pretty much like, no, this is pretty specific to school psychology?
Yeah, so I think that it's both, right? So almost nobody who's a school psychologist wrote on there about me when they were a child, I want to be a school psychologist when they grow up. So almost all of us fall into this field, and many people are working on undergraduate degrees in psychology, general psychology, child psychology, and then somehow get connected to the field of school psychology. For me, it was learning about early childhood assessment and thinking about ways that I was able to kind of influence schools more generally. So like many of us, I don't remember really actually ever wanting to be anything other than a teacher when I grew up, but I was smart and I was good at school. And so people said, well, you'll be a doctor when you grow up, or you'll be a lawyer when you grow up. But really all I wanted to do was be a teacher. Not that that's not at all, not that that is not as valued of a profession as being a doctor or a lawyer, but that's kind of the way our culture talks to us. Right. So I was learning about school psychology and just kind of found that this was a huge passion and a huge connection for me. So once you're kind of choosing that graduate degree in school psychology, it is a little bit more specific. There are fewer kind of other things that you can do, but the best part about it is school psychologists can do many, many jobs in a school that contributes greatly to how kids do and what they are able to access and have in their lives.
Could you give us an example of any of the other things that school psychologists do?
Sure. So school psychologists really play a pretty broad role in educational systems. They do special education evaluations, and they're really kind of measurement and data experts, which is really cool for somebody like me who loves to kind of be able to measure progress and see how things work. We also do work such as working with students and working with families. We can provide counseling services to kids. We also do a lot of consultation services. So I can work with a teacher. So if you're in your music classroom struggling with how do I engage this student, or how do I stop this kid from tapping his foot all day, that's a great role of a school psychologist in providing consultation around behavior or learning.
I think this really ties into the next question very well, because from some of the research that I've done, and it's not a ton, but I've done some reading and I'm listening to some podcasts. School psychologists are often tied up with testing and IEP writing, and I think I even heard one of them say it's test, IEP, repeat was kind of what they felt. And I get the sense that that people in the field, that they want more than that. So first, is that a pretty accurate observation?
I think it is, and I think it's really regional as well. One of the things that we always talk about is we have huge shortages in the field of school psychology. We have way more people retiring than we have people coming up to fill the jobs. And so what happens is, because in a school system, there's only one person in a school system who can give an IQ test. And so if you're the only person who can do that job, you're going to end up having to do it because it has to be done in order to determine special education evaluation eligibility. So if you're in a rural part of the country, or a place where school psychologists are few and far between, you're going to get stuck in a cycle of test, write an IEP, repeat. In places where there's more robust staffing, school psychologists are able to use that more expanded role much more fluently.
So let's talk about testing and IEPs, because I've definitely been in IEP meetings, but I would say I have probably zero understanding of the kind of work that you're laughing already. I have zero idea of the work that you guys do to get those things ready.
Yeah.
Testing and IEPs.
Sure. So it's kind of multifaceted. The purpose of an educational evaluation is to really determine both if a student is eligible for special education services, and then also look at those educational needs that a student may have. So when we do those evaluations, we give those tests, we have teachers fill out rating scales. We're really trying to understand how a disability may impact a student's access and participation to general curriculum. So for example, if you're a student with autism and you're going to a music class and you have difficulty processing sensory information, you have difficulty with loud noises, unexpected noises, peers close by you, working with groups, things that are happening in your classroom over and over again, that will become very difficult for a student with autism. So the goal of our assessment would be to say, hey, these are the environments where this student is really successful, and then these are the things that are potentially challenging. And then in that IEP process, we really want to kind of design those both interventions as well as accommodations so that that student can access and participate with their peers. So for that example student I was talking about, we might say the student is going to sit near the door in case they need to take a break. The student may wear headphones. We may talk to the student beforehand about what's going to happen in music class today so that they know what to expect, so that things are not as startling or jarring. We also would work on teaching skills and having that student practice different things that they may need in order to participate more. So we might talk about teaching a set of strategies where if I feel like that my environment is too loud, I can do these things. So we're really trying to reduce some of those challenging behaviors and increase skills.
So if a school psychologist is kind of stuck in that test, IEP, repeat, does that, to me, that seems like maybe they're not getting enough time with the student individually? Is that what's happening?
Yeah, I think that could be so. And I think that just like I said, with the shortages, it's really difficult because if there's 100 evals that need to be done and there's only one school psychologist, the school psychologist is probably going to get stuck doing a lot of evals and is not going to have enough time. to do other activities. I think one of the great ways that school psychologists can kind of break themselves out of that cycle is really working on multi-tiered systems of supports and finding ways that schools can support students outside of the special ed process. So if we have more robust interventions that are in place for kids, there are fewer evals to do because there are fewer kids that are demonstrating those needs for special ed services, and their needs can be really met in that general curriculum and in that general environment.
We've talked about this already a little bit, but you could expand on it if you'd like. What unique expertise do school psychologists offer to the educational systems?
Yeah, I think it's really broad. And I think that that's one of the best things about school psychology training is that you really get training in a wide variety of areas. So you learn a lot about learning and about reading instruction and math instruction and the instructional hierarchy and how do kids learn. So you have that expertise. And we also get training in mental health and social emotional learning and some of those types of skills as well. So it's both academics and it's behavior. We also learn a lot, like I mentioned, about teacher consultation. So how do I work with a teacher, with a team around working with an individual student? We also learn a lot about systems level and problem solving from a systems level. So thinking about all the kids in your school, if you have 75% of your kids are not making academic progress, we want to talk about general curriculum modifications or things that need to happen in our classrooms more broadly. So thinking about systems consultation and how do we do work like that. Our greatest expertise, and everyone who knows a school psychologist will be driven nuts by our data analysis and show me the data, and we want to know what that looks like. So we have that expertise too, and really helping teachers measure and know what their students are learning and how they're learning.
So I'm imagining that on a daily basis, if you're doing IEPs and testing, that there's many roadblocks for school psychologists. Like I'm imagining, a conversation with a parent that doesn't want the stigma of special education put on their student. What other, first, am I right? And then what other kind of roadblocks are you hitting on a daily basis?
Yeah, I think that that's definitely one of them. And when we think about telling a parent that their child has a disability, if that's new information for them or that's something that they don't really resonate with, that can definitely be a huge barrier. And a lot of that has to do with just grief and loss when you think about the way that you are parenting and what you had in your mind for who your child was and everything like that. That can definitely take some time to get used to. There's also huge cultural considerations and in general, the majority of school psychologists, and especially in Minnesota, are white women. And the majority of the students that we work with in many places are not. And so the disconnect between what's asked, we're asking of our students and what we're expecting in classrooms may be different than what is expected or valued in home environments. So that's definitely a challenge that we face. I think another day-to-day challenge is just trying to manage the proactive with the reactive. So we have kids all day and we have needs that come up. And so how do we move from responding to things as they're happening to putting systems and structures in place to prevent them from happening? So, right, think about throwing the babies in the river. You can pull all the babies out of the river, but you should probably go up to the top and figure out who's throwing them in to begin with. And so how do we kind of move ourselves from that place to the place where we are able to do that more preventative work?
So I think this next thing we're going to talk about is one of the reasons that it's difficult, because the National Association for School Psychologists recommends a ratio of 500 students to 1 school psychologist, which when I was thinking about that, I'm like, that seems unmanageable. That doesn't, that's a really big number. But it's that recommendation it's far worse than that, I guess, in many school districts. I saw somewhere that there's school districts that are 5,000 to 1. Minnesota is better than that. I believe the number is 1,164 to 1. What, in your opinion, is preventing school districts from providing, this kind of support in an adequate, ratio?
So it's multifaceted. One is shortages. We have a huge lack of school psychologists being trained. So for example, North Dakota does not have a training program for school psychologists right now. They're on the chopping block. The training programs are on the chopping block. Minnesota State University and Moorhead just had to go through a huge process in order to be able to even keep their program running. So then we were at a point where we had just fewer training programs in order to produce psychologists for the people who are leaving the field. The other thing is there's just been historically huge funding shortages. And so when it comes down to it, if we think about maintaining classroom sizes and we think about making sure that kids have what they need, those kinds of jobs sometimes can fall off, and especially jobs that are more focused on intervention and preventative work. They're often the first jobs that will cut if we come to budget shortfalls, right? So I know I have to have enough people to give IQ tests and do special ed evaluations, but I don't have to have that specialist focusing on student mental health. And I don't have to have that person who teaches us strategies on reading. So those are positions that will get cut when budgets get tight. I think that there's also just an understanding of what do school psychologists do. And so like projects like this, where you're just increasing awareness of the skills that folks have, that really helps as well in terms of just managing that work and helping people understand that if you add these positions, you're going to really get a huge value, and that you're going to get you're going to get a multifaceted person who's able to kind of assist in a variety of different areas.
What are some of the other issues, like larger scale issues that the field of school psychology is facing?
Yeah, I think that awareness is huge. Like I said, there's almost no school psychologists who grew up thinking that they were going to do this. So if you're lucky, you happen upon a school psychologist somewhere along your career, and you're introduced to what that field is. So folks just don't even know it's a job possibility. We have school counseling programs that are have applicants out that, they're just coming for days, and there's just many people, because everyone knows what a school counselor is and everybody's familiar with that. But school psychologists have historically not done enough to tell our story, and we've been down in the coat closet working with individual students and individual families versus really kind of being out there and getting to know folks, so that kids grow up thinking like, oh, that's a job possibility that I would want to consider. I think that another challenge facing just the field in general is just changing kind of expectations in our systems and understanding of kind of what does this mean and how do we do these things. And a lot of it has to do with general issues regarding what's happening in our community as a whole. So many people in school psychology were really trying to embody this anti-racism work, and how do we take a lot of what's happening there in terms of influencing what's happening in our schools. So that's a big issue. Legislatively, we work really hard to lobby for things that matter in schools. So not just things related to school psychologists, but things we think are good for kids in general. But those are kind of some of those issues that are impacting.
Yeah, and if you're talking about a group of people that are already, they've got 1,000 kids under their watch, it's hard to find time for that advocacy. It's one of those cyclical things, right? Like you're really busy with your job, so how do you make people aware of what you're doing?
Yeah, certainly.
Is retention an issue at all?
Yes, definitely. And I think retention even has to do with sometimes it's one of the best parts about being a school psychologist is because of the wide variety of skills that folks have, they often move into different jobs. So a lot of school psychologists will end up in leadership positions in special education departments and in school districts as a whole. They start working in consulting types of roles because they have a lot of skills and people want to use them. I think that there's also an element of burnout. The work is hard, and without proper self-care skills, and like all of us as educators, right? Like if we don't have appropriate self-care skills, the work can become overwhelming. It's challenging to work in the margins and working with families that are experiencing a lot of challenges. So that's definitely something that can impact folks too.
Yeah. For this next question, I'd like to think of starting like small and local and then branching bigger. So
Okay.
how can I, as a teacher, like help support my school psychologists?
So locally, know who they are. So especially in some in rural areas, you might have a school psychologist that covers your entire district. So they could be spending time in their car and just knowing who they are and the work that they can do, and then asking for them for things. So if you're really struggling with a student, reach out to them and say, hey, I would love to get your perspective on what's going on with um, Jose in my classroom, and just develop a relationship with them, and that's really how that advocacy starts. And then I have a boss who talks about how the reason she loves school psychologists to this day is that because when she was a new teacher and she was struggling with a lot of things that new teachers struggle with, she had a school psychologist who really came into her classroom and mentored and coached and provided guidance and gave her strategies and resources in terms of becoming a successful teacher. So reach out and connect and see who they are and to see that the things that they can and really share.
And then, so let's go maybe a little bit bigger then, because I imagine that there's some lobbying activities that either you're part of or the association is a part of. Is there a way we can support anything specific?
Yeah, so there's been a couple of campaigns that we've been really trying to throw ourselves behind this past year. One of them was around including a definition of multi-tiered systems of support. And that is really just getting back to kind of all of the things that we think are important for kids and really getting the legislature to provide some kind of regulation and monetary support for supporting MTSS systems in schools. So most people will believe that students having access to a variety of resources based on what they need is important, but people don't really know how to do that and how to make that happen. And they need resources and technical support in order to get that put into place. So we put a lot of our lobbying and efforts into doing that this year. So that's one of those things that anybody can support, because as a teacher, you see that all the time. You know that there are kids, some of your kids that need more than just your general strategies. And so really having kind of a variety of resources and supports in place or available to students, that's critical. And I think teachers have a really good perspective on that too. And legislators love hearing stories. They love hearing about particular kids. They want to know how Scott was impacted by this. And so being able to kind of share your educator stories or your connections to your school psychologist, like the story I mentioned before, if you've had a really good experience sharing that with your principal or with your elected officials, that helps us with awareness and as well, and also directing resources towards our work.
All right. Well, I guess that we're kind of at the end of my questions, unless I missed something. Or, is there anything that you'd like to plug for our listeners?
I just want to thank everyone for the work that they do on behalf of our kids and our families. We've had the most difficult time for the past 18 months that I think anybody can would have ever experienced. So thank you to everyone for the work that you do, and hug your school psychologist.
All right. Thank you so much. Thanks for being here today.
All right. Thank you.